Alright, hello and welcome everyone. So before we get started with today's video, I would like to ask that any of you guys let me know if the video is good. I'm using a new editing software and getting used to it, so if it's good, bad, things are too loud, things are too quiet, let me know that stuff, as the feedback is very helpful for me getting better with the new editing software I'll be using, and just let me know how it is. With that out of the way, we're going to be talking about leaks in DUVIRI. These are not like hard confirmed leaks or anything like that. These are just some things posted on the Reddit, basically, by a user named the Lazy NG. So nothing in this video has like any kind of hard confirmation, but I thought that it would be an interesting kind of thought exercise to go through what these things would mean if they are true. And also, I have cleaned up the leaks as they were to be much more readable on the public site. So if you guys want to follow along with the notes, or if you just want to look at everything for yourself, because we're not going to be going over absolutely everything that's in these. We're just going to be talking very broadly about them. Those are going to be available there. That's going to be in the link down below. So please go check that out. And thank you to everyone who supports the public archive. I much appreciate it. So with all that out of the way, if you proceed further, you will see potential spoilers for things that are going to come with DUVIRI. More specifically, and also still vaguely, we're going to be going over rewards and progression that we will potentially get, and what those things would mean broadly for DUVIRI overall, and my thoughts on it. So with that, let's get started first on the reward potential, as there is kind of a bit less here, and it's still interesting to talk about. So, as a reward, we are potentially getting Incarnin adapters for primaries, secondaries, and melee weapons. And what these seem to break down to is basically being able to acquire an item that gives you the Incarnin, like kind of perk system for a bunch of different weapons. In this case, it's a lot of older weapons that have, come long past their heyday. The Bratton, the Burstin, Dread, Latron, Miter, Paris, Soma, Strun, Torrid for primaries, for example. With all of these weapons, the leak is kind of noted as this stuff all working on the prime variations and all those usual variations of the weapons, similar to how a Riven would work on these different weapons, where like regular Bratton will have it, and so will Bratton Prime, and so on and so forth. But of course, everything that we're going to be talking about is up in the air as to if it's real or going to be changed, and we're even going to get it. This system, incredibly interesting. First and foremost, incredibly interesting. And basically, the way that I would see a system like this would be a second stab at DE trying to do Rivens, but to do them right. Of course, it would work a very similar way. And trying to do Rivens correctly, and what I mean by that is that Rivens, as they stand right now, generally they are a thing that just can be good on a weapon if the disposition is high enough and the roll is right. And they do not make old bad weapons, such as like the Bratton Prime, or the Burstin Prime, or the Dread, or the Dread's not that bad, but still, they don't make these older weapons. They don't make them new. They don't make them like come up to the top. They don't fix anything. They don't do what the original stated goal of the Rivens was, which was to make the older weapons relevant if you get a Riven for them. These Incarnate adapters appear to be another jab at trying to get that done, and I think they have a lot of potential for much more success here, especially because these things could, of course, be edited later at no real problem, and there would theoretically be no real randomness with this once you've acquired it, so DE could just make balancing decisions based on the Incarnins on weapons without having to change anything else, and could make weapons that are good at early game and at an appropriate power level, like the regular Bratton and the Bratton Prime, perhaps, although the Bratton Prime's a bit hard to get for how not very good it is, honestly. But then take those weapons and make them more interesting for players are going to be so far in that they're going to be getting big rewards from DUVIRI, like this would be. Also, we have some kind of tables of what possible buffs would be on these, and also worth noting, in the leak for this, there is also stuff listed like the Boltor. This is obviously not listed in the Incarnate primary adapters, but the Boltor is listed as having a pool, so it's very, very possible that these are not even close to the full list, or like there will be some origin list of a few things that we would get, and then get other stuff later with future releases related to DUVIRI, such as, of course, the expansion. We usually get the 1.5 style updates, which we would expect with DUVIRI, and this could be something that could be inside that. The thing that I want to focus on is not like if these different choices and Incarnin levels can fix anything, but their general structure and also some interesting things that I noticed that are in here. So, in terms of general structure, our Incarnins, as they stand right now, basically have 5 tiers, although the first tier isn't used by any of our current Incarnin weapons as just unlocking Incarnin mode, essentially. So we basically have 4 stats to choose from. These appear to have 3 tiers instead of the 4, and they just contain, our similar type of buffs that we've seen for a lot of cases, which is like projectile speed, clip speed, high status chance, balanced crit and status chance, high crit chance. Those types of choices that you would make in the Incarnin system appear to generally be here, although there are a few things that are interesting, and the Burstin is the one that kind of encapsulates all of that, I would say. So, X multi-shot for the last Burstin mag, punch through with armor above X. So that's what we have here. Last burst in magazine getting X multi-shot. This could obviously be like a huge amount of damage at the back end, which could be very good potentially. But much more interesting is a style of buff that we have never seen before, which is a buff that is determinate based on a different stat that you have. So in this case, punch through with armor above X, say, gives like 5 punch through, but you have to meet a threshold of like 250 armor. That is super interesting because a mod that has a requirement like this and makes it so you must build around or choose a Warframe that already meets those types of requirements, super interesting. And doing these types of requirements in terms of like any different number, like just spider web of stats, basically, could create builds where you're making really weird choices you would not make normally in order to get large payoffs. Obviously, I don't think that punch through of any amount really is going to be a thing that is going to create a full system of like, of course you build around this and you make this happen. But just the thought that this type of effect could be a thing entering Warframe, I think is very interesting for the potential of builds going forward, where you're using your mods to meet a bunch of different weird thresholds for a bunch of different items that you're putting together to create a build that becomes much more than the sum of its parts, because the sum of its parts are there in service of hitting these minimums in order to create a very powerful build out of weird shit, basically. So that's super interesting. Other stuff on here, we have clip size, reload from empty, increased reload speed, recoil, all kind of standard stuff. And then damage increased by X% for each full burst that hits, reset on reload, which is interesting because, having weapons that don't reload is a thing that we can do with ammo efficiency and such like that for a lot of weapons. Obviously, the Burstin doesn't have access to that, but you could, of course, use ammo efficiency and also like clip size on the tier 2 to maybe enable something that would give you very high damage. And then we also have damage per status on target, which is your notable condition overload type effect, which we know is, of course, usually very, very good. And on a weapon like the Burstin, hey, I mean, it is a status weapon because of just the amount of projectiles that it spews out. So that is also interesting. Basically on here, there's a bunch of different things that are weird build-arounds we've not seen before. A good one of these is the Incarnin Dread as an example, which we have with Despair and Hate equipped, increased fire rate and damage per hit, stacks up to 5 times, resets on miss. This is, obviously, all of the different, like, Incarnin potentials with this have, like, a thing that Despair wants you to equip Dread and Hate wants you to equip Despair and Dread wants you to equip Despair and Hate. So it really is like, if you got all 3 of these, it would encourage a full kind of Stalker loadout, which ties in with the thing that I was mentioning earlier, where you're trying to hit all these different requirements on things in order to get big bonuses. So for the Dread, increased fire rate and damage per hit stacks up to 5 times. Obviously, there's no numbers associated with this, but if the damage per hit stacks 5 times, if you looked at me and told me a number that was like 300%, stacks 5 times, that's 1,500% damage. And yeah, the Dread would definitely have a place to be used if it was getting those types of damage bonuses, and would be super deadly even at Steel Path levels, especially given that the Dread is already pretty decent as it stands. And also interesting is in the tier 1, if you combined those two things, or combined that bottom perk with the one up here, is increased damage and projectile size. Arrows can be directed at like Tenant Envoy's shots while invisible, which is super interesting. The Tenant Envoy's shots thing would probably maybe be more like Ivara, I would surmise. But increased damage and projectile size. Projectile size is really interesting because the only thing that theoretically correlates with that is like the girth of your arrows, basically. Like how the Nataruk works. The Nataruk is not a weapon that explodes. It simply fires a tree-sized projectile down a hallway. And if you combine using that on the Dread to make a much thicker arrow, and then combine it with good damage stats on the tier 3, and then, like, less zoom or more projectile speed or what have you in the tier 2, That's probably a pretty compelling reason to use the Dread, which is a very slash-weighted, slash-heavy weapon that can deal a lot of damage that way, and then also, slap hunter munitions on it probably, and so on and so forth. There's probably an interesting weapon to be built there. So I think that there is a lot of interesting things that they could put on weapons, and also this could be a long-term reward where they could add more weapons to it and give you more reasons to keep coming back to DUVIRI, which is, of course, what you want. We want DUVIRI, which is purported to be this like rogue-like thing, which we're going to get to more in a moment, to be a thing that you want to constantly come back to. And if they were to cycle in, say, 10 more weapons that you could get access to, that would be a reason to be like, okay, I'm going to start doing, DUVIRI like every day or whatever to try and build up to these new items that I want. Maybe they put the Arcoplasmor in there, and my 10 Arcoplasmor is, one of my favorite weapons. I want the interesting new perks for that thing. Seems like a good long-term reward for DUVIRI to potentially have, and also an interesting one that could maybe bring some of these older weapons up, or weapons that are just generally out of favor, can be brought up to, where your Kuva Nukors are sitting at right now. So yeah, a full list here in terms of like what we have for the link, and of course all those perks, all organized, all nice. The original link for this, if you want to look at it on the Reddit, much less readable, so I would highly suggest checking it out on the site. The other thing we're going to look at, this is the overall progression system, and honestly, this makes me more excited for DUVIRI, so this is a leak that I just hope is real, honestly. And also, this has a lot of weight in terms of things that we've seen already, and a lot of these things could be very predicted outside of kind of one main chunk of the leak here, and that is DUVIRI intrinsics, Drifter intrinsics. So this would essentially be just like the Railjack system of intrinsics, or very, very similar enough to be called the same thing, where you would have different departments where you can put points in and get different bonuses that basically make each subsequent run better and more powerful. So, first one we have here is Drifter Intrinsic Riding your horse, of course. We have like the description and such here. Riding skill 1 allows summoning horse by pressing 4. Name of this skill, Summon Horse. Very straightforward, probably very useful. You're going to want to have your horse. And then other things in here, tapping shift makes the horse dash, better mobility for the dash, or better mobility for the horse, and so on and so forth. That's basically what this all encompasses, and I'm not going to spend too much time going over like everything here, except for to note that enable quick travel, warping, and DUVIRI through the map when you hold M. That, of the list here, seems like by far the best possible perk on here. This is very much like the Railjack perk that allows you to teleport around your ship and also teleport to teammates. Having quick warping, especially around a large open world, that's going to be even better. So I do expect that if this is real, that would be a thing that people would go for basically first. Like the absolute first thing you would probably want to do is be able to enable fast travel, just so you could do DUVIRI much, much quicker. With that out of the way, this is like kind of just an interesting introductory to this. And then we have the much more interesting one, which gives us some insight into the structure of DUVIRI, and that is opportunity. These are all around controlling the RNG of the boons, warframes, and weapons you are offered. So, right away, this would confirm for everyone worried about it that we are going to be getting warframes in DUVIRI. We're going to have our Drifter, we're also going to have warframes, we're also going to have weapons, and there are, of course, going to be the boon stuff. And the boon stuff we already knew about, and the warframe stuff was heavily implied. So before we continue any further, I do want to replay some stuff from what we've seen of DUVIRI so that you guys can get an idea for just what we have already seen, or for those of you that forgot or just never knew. First and foremost, here is from the DUVIRI Paradox gameplay demo that we got. This is I'm just basically just a screenshot here. This is Choose Your Decree, which would ostensibly be the boons that are being discussed in the leak, and these just have, some placeholder effects for the most part, but some effects that you would get for doing like kind of an open world thing in DUVIRI, getting some buffs here. Melee attacks deal 100 heat damage, instantly summon them, and mount a Loyal Kaith. And these clearly have some different rarities. We have like 2 uncommons and then a rare perk or boon or decree or whatever you want to call it, essentially. So we do know that that system exists no matter what. And this is in the kind of like prologue, like the actual quest of the DUVIRI Paradox, which is going to be really important for us to kind of rewatch this part of the DUVIRI Paradox gameplay demo, because there's a particular thing that I've thought for a long time that helps tie in all this stuff and make it feel a lot more real. Just to go into here. So,
now, of course,
we end up in this middle area here where, of course, you have the 3 starter warframes, as is the classic. It's the reference back to the initial quest of the game and so on and so forth. And then we encounter Wizard Teshin, as I call him. So walking into here, important dialogue.
So, you finally took the hand, did you?
That has some lore implications. I could talk into another Warframe for the amount of time.
Fool! You know how this works. Second only to your apathy.
So the important thing here,
The
the other side's trying to help you, so on and so forth, set up for the quest. You have the different Warframes, and the Drifter attempts to choose a Warframe here.
See where it goes.
And obviously, it does not work. As we all know, for those of you that have seen this, it does not work.
I thought so. Old dogs and new tricks. Go on, go wallow in your routine.
Fine, I'm getting out of here on my own.
Okay.
Oh, now. That would be a surprise, wouldn't it? Take my old blade.
Okay, so that stuff is all super important because this is the introduction to DUVIRI, which we know is going to happen before the new war. We know this is going to be somewhere probably after the Second Dream and around like the the War Within era. We're going to encounter this quest somewhere before the new war, and that's incredibly important because at this point the Drifter does not have void powers and they can't use a Warframe. So the way that I think that this is going to be structured is you're going to do this quest earlier on, and you're going to have to use only the Drifter and like use Teshin's swords and so on and so forth. And this is going to be its own contained story thing, so you know about the Drifter. And then once you have gotten past that, and you go to the new war, and you complete the new war, and the Drifter gets the void powers in the new war, so that they can use Warframes and so on and so forth, then you will return to the paradox with the Drifter having basically always had those powers after the new war being what it is, and that making it so that the full gameplay loop of DUVIRI is then accessible. Also, with this place that, you're talking to Wizard Teshin, and this area, I believe this is going to be the point where you're going to start your daily missions in DUVIRI, because based on what the devs have said, we know that DUVIRI is going to be a thing that they essentially want you to be able to run every day. And it would make sense to start from this hub once you have full access to the kind of totality of what you're going to have. And that's going to make more sense with the boon stuff we're about to read. But to be here and then choose a Warframe and make your other starting choices, and then to basically do your run from those starting choices in this sort of roguelike mode. Supporting that thing that we've thought for a while, or the thing that I've thought for a while, at least I talked about on stream a whole lot, we have these intrinsic opportunities. So boons now show one additional option, more choices whenever you get choices on buffs, 2 additional weapon choices for your loadout. How these are going to be decided is going to be super interesting on whether it's like weapons that you have in your inventory, or like if you can make certain weapons eligible, or if it's all weapons in the game. All potentially very interesting. You get a free boon at the start of DUVIRI, so you start with a buff. And then Warframe choice has one more option. So in that room, theoretically, you would have more Warframe options. I do wonder if you're going to start DUVIRI with a single Warframe option once you kind of get full access to it. Based on this, it would be like 2 additional choices, which is you get 1 more here and then 1 more on skill 8 for a total of 3. I do wonder if DUVIRI would be kind of like too free in terms of like what Warframes are going to be picked if you got up to like 5 options, if you started with 3 and then got 4 and then got 5. I do wonder if that would maybe make it a little bit too free. Also, I think it would be interesting for DE potentially to start you with 1, to have more data on what Warframes kind of randomly get rolled for people, and if people see success or not, to know more information on whether or not those Warframes may need changes in the future. I think that would be like a really useful data for DE to potentially be able to collect. And also, even whenever you get 3 choices, you'll still see more people choosing kind of bad choices more often, because there are going to be less good choices overall each day. In addition, 50% chance more rare boons. Obviously, we know like boon levels exist because we see the uncommon and rare just in the in the demo itself. You can re-roll the boon choice 3 times per session. This is just like a very classic roguelike thing that we've seen in the past. Like Hades has this, for example. Just makes sense to be on the tree like this. 9 and 10 don't have anything here, and then 2 additional weapon choices for loadout. So this all comes together to, I think, give us something very interesting in terms of you start a run, and like if presuming you have all these maxed out, if you only have like, you know, say you start with 2 weapon choices and 1 Warframe choice, you basically get both of those weapons in all likelihood. And then once you're maxed out, choose from 3 Warframes and 6 weapons, essentially. That, as a baseline, I think is pretty interesting to start out a run. Now, everything is based off what those boons are going to be doing, because Warframe as a game, I think, is very interesting, and like there's a lot of like build opportunity, and the stats for kind of a roguelike mode are kind of built into the game with just what the mods do. But whether or not DE goes that route where it's like, well, you're getting a boon that's going to give you 30% range, you're getting a boon that's going to give you 50% efficiency because it's like a rare boon that gives more efficiency or whatnot. That stuff is all super interesting. And frame choice is much different in terms of, like, let's presuming you start with nothing in terms of Warframe stats and don't just get to bring your full builds in here, which would be a very different story if we did. Starting with nothing, the actual Warframe choices you might want to make become very, very different. Lavos is a Warframe that I don't think is particularly great right now, but Lavos doesn't have an energy economy, and that, when you have nothing, is an incredibly strong buff. Same thing for Hildren. Octavia, with her passive, is considerably stronger just because her passive generates you energy when you cast your abilities. Things like that become much larger considerations in a mode like this and are very like interesting to think about, and you might make some different choices. For example, like Mesa is a Warframe that is obviously amazing. We all know that Mesa is an absolutely fantastic Warframe, but in a situation where you can't guarantee yourself efficiency or even a good chunk of strength or, like, you know, easy access to energy, per, you know, depending on whether or not you can use Xeneric or not or what have you, it could make Mesa considerably worse, especially if she doesn't get mods for her Peacemakers. That's a different consideration. There's all these things that can make it more interesting and different from the main game in terms of the choices that you'll make. Warframe like Revenant is much better in this case. Rhino, much better in this case. Survivability, of course, comes first, and we wouldn't have just, you know, easy access to shield gating like we kind of do in the main game now. All very, very cool. To quickly go over the other stuff, which I think is like less interesting. Endurance, this is just stuff that helps you survive. More HP for boon. Takes 1 more stack of lack of confidence to reach max. This kind of basically clearly, I would say, alludes to a lives system where you can only die so many times and you basically have to reset or you lose for the day or what have you. So basically, like, this would give you another life is how I am interpreting this, which just makes sense. But yeah, having more health and headshots heal you by 50 and things like that. Just interesting things for more survivability and just things that will help you get further as you have more endurance, of course. Combat on ability cast, more damage, so on and so forth. Notable thing that is here is on skill 6, enemies scanned with target radar become slowed for 3 seconds. Target radar is the scan that you have during the new war as the Drifter that marks all of the enemies. So we might be seeing the return of the Drifter's abilities, which is a consideration here. This one would be, you know, kind of open to whether or not it would be those same abilities, but target radar specifically is the skill that we have during the new war, so we might be getting those back. I know a lot of people really enjoyed those. And then that's all we have for intrinsics. So having, you know, 4 trees here for different intrinsic levels, that does also mean that a new kind of just overall increase that we'd be getting would be, if this is exactly 1-to-1 with the way Railjack does it, every intrinsic level would be worth 1,500 mastery, meaning there'd be 60,000 mastery in this system, which of course just makes it easier and easier for people to rank up potentially, and also gives people a different option if they wanted to do DUVIRI for progression. Overall, I think between the Incarnate stuff that we've seen the Incarnate stuff that we've potentially seen that may be happening, this stuff seems cool. If it's real, I'm excited. And in terms of the progression system stuff, this stuff just all like makes sense. If this is what we would be getting, this stuff just all makes sense to bring back into here. Like the Incarnate stuff that was great in the Zaramon, fantastic system that I think is like being used again. Great stuff. I think everybody really generally really likes the Incarnates and thinks that they're interesting. And of the Railjack stuff that exists, I think that the intrinsics are probably one of the things that most easily can be mapped into other places and is smart to map into other places. So the only thing that we would really be missing is kind of a long-term reward that's not the Incarnate adapters. And what I mean by that is just your general kind of average everyday type rewards, such as, um, endo, relics, credits, all kinds of things can be an evergreen reward. That's one of the few things that we don't have, but like probably it would exist. If you look at Railjack is a good source of all three of those things I just mentioned. And I think that it would be kind of weird if this is all true and all of this thought is already going into these systems and all of this interesting stuff is already like, being considered and thought about, and like all of this, if all of this stuff happens and there is like at least one good source of one of the evergreen rewards that I just mentioned, and the most important thing, if the gameplay loop is fun, which is of course the hardest part and the part with the most consideration, if they can nail all of those things, I think that the framework scene here and the framework scene here are super interesting and good. And if they can nail the other two parts, it looks like DUVIRI's probably going to be fantastic. But yeah, once again, you guys can check out the full notes up on the site. Honestly, like these leaks just made me want DUVIRI even more, and I hope that they're true more so than anything else. But yeah, it's super interesting stuff. Let me know what you guys think about any of like the potential here, or like if you think these rewards are going to be good. Personally, I think that they're super interesting at the absolute minimum. And yeah, and then of course, as I mentioned at the top, tell me how like the audio is, and like if the video like looks still good or whatnot. For the videos and such, as I am using a new editor. So yeah, that's gonna do it. I will see you guys tomorrow. All right, hello everybody. Sorry things have been a little slow, but I have been learning a new editor, as I'm sure you're probably aware from the beginning of this video. But let's get started. Thanks to all of my $10 patrons: Brutus Salazar, Dylan Dworsky, Ethrain, Jacob Bean, James Harthorne, JC for Science, Jefferson Clark, Joshua Adams, Luzanth, Malik X Williams, Metrozanka, Minty Ginja, Mitchta, Nicholas Gridley, Paradise, Shan Hardeen, Zach Zahner, and Zeraphir. And thank you very much to all of the rest of my patrons as well. It is much appreciated for the support, especially as I'm, learning some new editing stuff to try and get better and have the videos be higher quality, and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's gonna do it for the video. Expect some weird things to be happening this month, I suppose. Like, more weird editing shenanigans in all likelihood. But yeah, thanks everybody.